I don't think in your 3-volume on Keynes there was the magnitude of fiscal debt and deficit that we have now. What do we do about the magnitude of the debt?
Well, there was really, if you think of the debt incurred in the First World War, I mean that was absolutely huge. Well, I mean 200, I think 200 or 250% of gross domestic product. So that was sort of comparable to what we're seeing today. And the way they got out of it was through the growth of the economy eventually. It's the only way really to reduce the net burden of debt is the economy has to grow.
Right.
And you've got to have policies to make it grow, help it grow.
Lord Skidelsky, one of the charms of your work is short term is 10 years. Politicians can't work the Skidelsky timeline. Politicians are worried about 2 years, 4 years, 6 years, maybe at the most 8 years. How do politicians extend their timeline to get to where they trust that growth will work out these huge debts?
Well, you know, I think the first thing is, I mean, I believe the problem is what do you do in the next 12 months? So in that sense, I'm quite short-term about this. I mean, we're going to have a recession. We're going to have a deep recession. It's not an unexpected event coming out of a clear blue sky. Everyone is forecasting it. It's just the doubt is about the extent to which the economy is going to slide. In the UK, they think it'll be, you know, about, I don't know, 13, 14, 15%. A smaller economy and with comparable unemployment. Perhaps in some countries it'll be less, but we're going to have a slide, and it's coming like a blackening cloud. And the question is, what are governments proposing to do about it? That's quite apart from the fact that we might get other waves of COVID, smaller waves. But what's the policy? And the cupboard seems to be a bit bare. I mean, it's sort of ambulance work now. We're keeping a lot of people. We're keeping the pay up of a lot of people who are not working, and we're paying businesses not to produce. How are we going to get beyond that?
Lord Skidelsky, what should the UK government do in terms of furloughs? So far they've rejected, you know, the asking or the extension of it, and that's a bit different to what Germany and France are looking at. Should they extend?
Well, you know, it's the awful problem with economics. You know, people if they take their model seriously, they will put their bets on a V-shaped recovery, so that as industry gradually reopens, so people will get back to their jobs in a reasonable way, and we'll have a quick return to normal. But it's not going to happen like that. There's a lot of industries have actually been forced to close down, and then the conditions under which they can continue are very, very restricted. So you have this supply shock, and then gradually demand will fall as the furlough is ended. Now, I mean, I think you can say, okay, let's extend income support for people, but you can't pay masses of people for not working forever. It's not that you run out of money. I'm not so worried about the debt, but you run out of wealth. The economy is shrinking, money supply is growing, and then you get just inflation, and the money is worth less and less, and you know the society gets poorer and poorer. So you've got to actually create work. You've got to do something. Government has to spend, provide work, and I believe it's got to start big public work schemes, just as Roosevelt did in the 1930s.
Robert, thank you so much. Lord Skidelsky there, UK House of Lords, Crossbench, Peer and Warwick University Professor Emeritus of Political Economy. Lord Skidelsky stays with us, and we'll talk a lot more about some of these fiscal programs. Now, coming up, Jonathan Golub, Credit Suisse Chief U.S. Equities Strategist. That's at 7 a.m. in New York. That's 12 p.m. in London. And this is Bloomberg.
Some things you see coming. Some things you don't. The trick is to be ready for anything. Pablo from Infrastructure Support is working every day to keep essential market data flowing seamlessly. We keep on, so you can keep on.
Europe does, as you say, have some catching up to do on that front. So we are expecting to see a little bit of strength coming through at the start of trade. How long will it last, though? The perennial question.
This is Bloomberg Surveillance. Tom and Francine from London and New York. Tom, we're having a great conversation with Lord Skidelsky, UK House of Lords Crossbench Peer and Warwick University Emeritus Professor of Political Science. Lord Skidelsky, we're talking a bit about, what governments need to do to help with displaced workers. Now, you've called for a jobs guarantee program. What's the merit of this? A lot of people in politics, think this would just be too difficult. Who can you convince about this being the right thing to do?
Well, I think I think you've got to start with just the idea of public works. That was a classical not remedy for depression. It was classical compensation for loss of private sector jobs. Governments provided public works, and you just have to look at all the things that could be done at a local level, as well as particularly at a local level, and to be convinced that it's not just a matter of just sweeping up leaves or filling up holes and digging them up again. Keynes had an off-the-cuff remark. He said, "Look, if you had people digging up holes and filling them up again, then need be no more unemployment." But that was a joke. He added, "If you can't think of anything more sensible to do." And of course, there are lots of more sensible things to do. Roosevelt found them in civilian conservation. Work program administration. Millions and millions of jobs doing good things in the United States in the 1930s.
Lord Skidelsky, I have been thunderstruck about the lack of study over the last 6 months or so on any kind of wage disinflation or outright wage deflation. Daniel Yergin opens Commanding Heights, his iconic one volume, with Clement Attlee struggling with the wage of the United Kingdom. Are we out of our minds that we're not studying the risk of true wage deflation?
Well, no. Well, of course we should be studying wage deflation. But you have this economic orthodoxy, don't you, that if you have flexible wages, you will maintain full employment. I mean, that is the model that is accepted by most economists.
Well, but this is really important. I don't mean to interrupt, Lord Skidelsky, but someone as opposite of Robert Skidelsky as John B. Taylor of Stanford will agree with you that sticky wages is an assumption. Is it?
Yeah, well, it's a perfectly reasonable assumption. Wages aren't like water or fluid things that sort of instantly adjust to whatever whatever the conditions are. They do stick, and in fact, that is why you do get depressions when you have a shock. You don't get wage adjustment, and what you get is an increase in unemployment, and then that feeds on itself, and the economy runs down. I mean, that's what Keynes said. That's what our experience is. Therefore, it's no good relying on the automatic forces of the market to bring about a very rapid recovery from shocks. I read many economists who expect a V-shaped recovery, and the instrument they rely on is flexible wages and prices. Mm-hmm. And that just seems to me the wrong model. It's wrong theoretically. It doesn't happen that way.
So Lord Skidelsky, theoretically, what kind of recovery are you expecting us to see?
Theoretically, what kind of, what am I expecting? Sorry, I didn't get
recovery.
That. Yeah, well, I'm expecting...
What kind of recovery?
What is called a U-shaped recovery. I think there'll be a long period, if, given that there isn't policy, given the policy, I think there'll be a period when we have very high rates of unemployment and the economy is smaller. eventually, in the long run, yeah, there'll be a return to normal. But what sort of normal will it be? Will it be the same normal as we had before? Or will work habits change? What will happen to the inner cities? One of the problems is that a service economy is very, very vulnerable to the cessation of business. And we have predominantly service economies in the UK, and they're being prevented from working because people have been prevented from using services.